But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with money.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
listen to this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with money.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
Let's try it. Aha! There we go. I had to spank OBS for not using the correct microphone. Everything has to be hard. Hello and welcome to Technical Difficulties with the Badgers. This is...
I am not hard. I would like to remind everyone that not
Hey.
I mean, it would be inappropriate at this point. I mean, we haven't
There we
even
go.
got into it.
Yeah, welcome to Hannah has a new microphone and doesn't know how to use it. No, just kidding. But we are on HBR Talk 348. There is no try, only do. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of my perceptivity, Mike Stevenson. And tonight, we've got to talk about that blind spot. And it's kind of a big one. Guys are much more not sneaky on purpose. Much more... Okay, now they're saying you're too quiet, Mike. It's quiet in here. Too quiet.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Okay. Turn it up by 10 on each.
There we
That
go.
should be okay.
But no, I was gonna say is guys are much more genuine a lot of times than women are. Women are sneaky. We are sneaky fucks. And it's probably an evolutionary thing.
I could be sneaky too.
Yeah.
Like they say women play games, but I'm like, I'll play your fucking game.
Yeah, when guys decide they
And I'll
want to
win,
be
damn it.
sneaky, yeah, exactly. Women play games all the time. When guys play, they win. And I've been on the receiving end of that. I have been outsmarted by, well, my husband outsmarts me, but that's a little bit more fun. I actually kind of enjoy that because that's one of my turn-ons. So there you go. But getting into the nitty-gritty here, sometimes it allows women to take advantage of you. When women try to outsmart you by being cutesy and innocent and victim-y and all that, and you kind of feel sorry for them, that is the first step down the pathway to getting fleeced. And we're going to talk about a couple of ways in which that plays out. And I have an article I'm going to read to sort of set the tone. But before we get into all of that, we still got to do what we got to do. So, as always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms to support our work, to fund our work, is treading on thin ice or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. So, in light of this, if you feel like we've earned your support, then we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justatip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com. where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that, before I get into anything, I did not open the Super Chows because I was fiddling with stuff that I don't usually have to fiddle with. There we go. So we did get a Super Chow from Meredith G already. She sent us $5 and said, HBR Talk 348, honey for the badgers. And I better make sure that I also have the Rumble chat open because I don't want to miss anything. Yeah. Yep, and so far it just tells me I started out with no sound. So, I do have a new microphone, new mic, who dis? But hopefully it sounds good.
It does. It's quite chocolatey.
It's quite different from my old mic.
You have that headset thing that makes you sound like a sports commentator from the 70s. But yeah, you're quite clear and lovely now.
Good. That's good. Maybe I'll make this the microphone I use for making my videos from now on. Then I had been using a Yeti, which I have had, I think, pretty much for the last 6 or 7 years now. I've been using that. But yeah. Yes, the YouTube chat is on. Yeah. And Jen Bottle says one mentor he had said that when women come out to engage, they come to play. When men come out, they come out to kill. And that when women don't realize this. And that is true. But when women come out, a lot of times they also don't tell you when they come out to play, and you think that they're being straightforward.
And
That's
that sounds
bad.
suspiciously like that feminist phrase that men are afraid that women are going to make fun of them, and women are afraid that men are going to kill them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But so I feel like I have to push back against that in some way. No, women come out to play, as in they get some other man to kill you, and men generally do their best to actually talk to you. It doesn't quite work out because they go, It's fine. It's all about communication, but there's nothing wrong. It's fine. And then they get some other guy to kill you. Misogyny.
Yeah. I think to answer the question of men and women I think the answer with regard to differences in handling playtime and everything, men will play as long as you recognize that you're just playing and you're not doing things that are genuinely mean and genuinely hurtful. Women don't always recognize the line between. And so, and I mean, there's joking around like, oh, I'm going to take your arm off and beat you with it, and stuff like that. And it's rough play verbally and stuff like that. But then there's turning, I don't know, cutesy, funny little jabs into playing the dozens when you weren't playing the dozens, right? That's women will cross that line, and they'll expect you to just take it, and they get really surprised when they find out that dudes are better at it than they are. And then they'll play victim when you hit back harder.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it comes down to this difference at a very early age that when little boys play with Batman toys, they imagine themselves as Batman, and they see themselves in the role as Batman, and they become Batman.
Mm-hmm.
But little girls project their own personality onto their toys. If they play with Batman, they make him sit down at a tea party and and drink teas and eat cookies with the Joker and that. That's why we're so fucked from an early age, because we're so different from an early age. But we can work around those differences somehow, as long as we recognize that we are as different as that from an early age, and that these things grow into I don't know. I'm trying to translate that into the dark area of not boys and girls, but men and women.
Well, for one
But,
thing, it makes it difficult for the sexes to always understand each other.
But video games are good at this because
Yeah.
they really do bridge the gap. Because when boys and girls are playing a video game together, this difference dissolves away, and they're both like, "Oh, you killed me! Oh, I actually died," because they're both playing
Yes.
the same character, and they have to play that same character by the same rules, by the same paradigm. Like, you can't just pretend that Mario is having a fucking tea party. No, he's fucking jumping on mushrooms, and he might die.
And then your mom gets upset. You killed your sister. What the heck? Like, and the neighbors are like, "What the heck is she talking about?" Back in the Atari 2600 days. What do you mean your son killed his sister? No. In a video game. But let's get on with this. This article is just it's just a bunch of thoughts. Okay, so it's not anything serious. It's not like my usual like researched stuff. So it's gonna sound a little different than what I usually write. And it started out with a Twitter X conversation that I didn't put into this because I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus that I got into arguments with. So, and I'm not going to start out talking about that argument either. So here we go. And I did put it in the chat if you guys want to open it. It's up now, so it should open up for you. The first big life-changing philosophy lesson I had that didn't come from a family member or a paid educator revolved around one of the simplest tasks, and it took me years to recognize that I'd already heard it in a movie when I was a kid. There is no try, only do. It was my first retail job as a cashier in a dinky little convenience store that sold a very little bit of a crap load of different things. I was given very little on-the-job training, thrown in and expected to swim with no experience, and then browbeaten by my manager of the store about everything I did, as if the store was going to crumble around us at any moment from the monstrous pressure of my sheer incompetence. Often it was as simple as insisting that I started mopping on the wrong side of the room, but sometimes I had to do it with more complicated stuff. And I learned something new every time. Then she got mad at me for being too obvious about taking mental note, when what she explained to me was new to me. There came a point in time where I just knew, without question, that I was going to be fired. In the middle of berating me for making a mental note out loud, cut the bread first. After she berated me for making the egg sandwiches and then cutting them diagonally instead of cutting the bread first and then making the sandwiches, she asked, "Why do you have to repeat everything I say?" I said, "I have a lot to learn from you. This is very different from photography, and I just want to do a good job."
Wait, how the hell do you cut the bread before making the sandwich?
You can.
What?
You take the bread knife, you take your stack of slices of bread, and you slice down through. And then you clean up the crumbs, you set your stacks aside, and you have these nice, tidy little triangles. She showed me. It works really well.
But okay, I'll have to experiment with this. Sorry, I interrupted. Carry on.
It's very effective.
I don't understand. Is it more effective though? It sounds like a lot more
Yes.
tedious than
It
just
did to
making
me
the
at the time,
sandwich and
too.
cutting them in half.
It really did. It did to me. I was sure she was wrong. I was absolutely sure. Like, what the fuck is this woman teaching me? You know, I was just taking the 2 scoops because we had a ice cream scooper, and you would scoop the sandwich filling out and put it on the bread, and you had exactly the right amount, and you'd spread it, and it would be. But it goes on. I'll go on with this. But she said, when I said I just want to do a good job, she said, "There's your first mistake. That's a platitude. What does it even mean?" And I had no answer. The job got a lot easier when I stopped focusing on that platitude and started focusing on the details of my tasks. For example, my manager explained, My manager explained when I was cutting the sandwiches, instead of the bread, filling was squishing out. It made the container look messy and the sandwich look less appetizing. we had these containers that were plastic, and you put the 2 triangle-shaped sandwiches into the container. The container was triangle, and then we had a label that you put over the opening, so if the filling squished out, then it looked like, the sandwich had been squished. It didn't look good. So it made the container look messy, and the sandwich look less appetizing. It made it less likely that a customer would pick that sandwich and buy it for lunch. It made my workspace messy, and also interrupted the flow of my work. That's the other thing, like the next sandwich, because now you've got egg salad on your workspace. If you don't clean up in between sandwiches, then you get that on the outside of the next sandwich, and the next. Every single sandwich I made looked awful.
Well, look, if you're going to cut the sandwiches like lengthways or widthways, then you still have 90-degree angles.
Mm-hmm.
But if cutting it diagonally means you turn 90-degree angles into 45-degree angles.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to stuff a filling into a 45-degree angle. You're going to get nothing but crust in those. This is confounding to me.
These are convenience store sandwiches, man. They are classic. You can find them all over the place, and you can get them pre-made now. Like when I worked at the gas station here in Dayton that I worked at, those came on a truck, on a refrigerator truck, and we didn't have to make those. But the sandwiches I made, this would have been in the 90s, the early 90s. These were different, and these I had to make. And we had a you know how you ice cake with a particular type of spatula that looks like it was made to use to paddle people, long and skinny, or it looks like a cricket bat, with a metal as the it's like got a wooden handle and it's got a metal piece. So that's what we used to spread the sandwiches. And you could make it really neat and tidy with that as long as you learned how to use it properly. But yeah. So I had made a mess of my work. She gave me a piece of advice, and one of those pieces of advice was stop focusing on doing a good job and focus on actually what you are doing. When the manager had initially gone over the task with me, she had pulled out a container of bread, sliced each piece, which I have that explained wrong, because when I say sliced each piece, I mean all of them, not individually. She went down a stack. And you just have to keep your hand on the bread. Like, I always put my left hand over the corner of the stack, so I would have like 4 pieces or more in my hand and my 2 fingers on top. And then where the knife was slicing, I would just go straight down through the whole thing. And since you're slicing, you're not cutting down. It's a serrated bread knife. It just goes straight down through, and that much pressure, because the bread is rough, it holds itself together. It doesn't move, and you don't get out of place on any of the slices of bread. And then you just set it aside. My first few times doing it, I had to slice the bread in smaller, separate stacks. So I sliced each piece separately. Then she pulled out the filling in the containers, took the price gun, dated the containers. So everything was already set up. You don't price them afterwards. You don't put any pressure on them afterwards. After you sticker the label on, you slap it on, and you put it in the case. You don't have to mess around with it anymore. So, assembly line style, she tidily manufactured and packaged the sandwiches and put them in the cooler. When she showed me, I hadn't paid attention to her order of operations. I had paid attention to the speed of her work. My sandwiches looked awful, like brutalist architecture dropped into the midst of an old, beautifully designed section of a city. She wanted me to mop from across the room to the utility sink, across the room from the utility sink to the part of the floor that was right next to it, so that when I picked up the non-rolling bucket we had, because we didn't have one of those nice janitor buckets, we just had a bucket and a mop and a squeegee on the bucket, which you had to be careful to not accidentally tip over the bucket with. This was not a sophisticated, expensive operation. She didn't want me to carry it across the room, dribbling it on the clean floor to go dump it out. So she had a reason for everything. Like, it wasn't senseless. It was mindfulness. Mindfulness is much more important than trying to be good. She wanted me to cut the bread first so my sandwiches would sell instead of going bad and being wasted. And I was getting a lot of on-the-job training that I hadn't thought of as such.
It just occurred to me how ironic it is, the cliche of a man telling a woman to make him a sandwich, when, if anything, everyone knows how to make a sandwich. Like, boys and girls alike, from the age of 10, they know exactly how to make a sandwich. It's the easiest thing to do. And by the way, it's a form of English cuisine. By the way, if you think you don't like English food, we invented the sandwich.
By the
sandwich
Earl of
is actually,
Sandwich.
well, by the servants of the Earl of Sandwich. But Sandwich is a town in southeast England. It is British cuisine. So yeah, you all love English cuisine, and yeah, there's not a man alive who doesn't know how to make a sandwich and who knows exactly how to make a sandwich exactly how he wants. Like, if I want a complex dish, like a curry, then I'm going to have to ask Lauren to do it for me. But if I want a sandwich, I'll fucking make my own sandwich. It's just, I don't know, I guess.
Yeah, but there is an
Duly
artistry
noted.
to doing it
Next
well.
time you come, I will have plenty of sandwich fixings, and you can make your own sandwiches.
I don't like American bread. It's it's full of weird shit that makes it last forever. You know what I mean?
Don't buy prepackaged store-bought bread unless you go to the bakery and get bread that was actually made in the bakery, because the stuff that comes off of a truck in a bag isn't real bread. It's bread-flavored cake.
Yeah, and I've noticed that, like, over the years of buying groceries and everything, you've had a loaf of bread that, if it sat too long, it'd start to get moldy. And I'm noticing now that it's taking a lot longer for that process to happen. And it just scares the shit out of me.
It actually turns into insulation before it.
Yeah.
It gets like this really dry, squishy weirdness to it before it gets moldy. But now from my perspective, I suppose bread not getting moldy is supposedly a good thing, because I am allergic to bread mold really badly. But we have a bread machine.
Nice.
But yeah, so I'll go on with this. I wasn't going to figure that stuff out by wanting to do a good job. I'd only do a good job if I paid real attention to what I was being shown, gave consideration to what I was learning, and then focus on the tasks at hand instead of worrying exclusively about the image I was presenting to the manager of someone doing a good job. One of the biggest mistakes people make is putting too much energy into trying to be a type of person, trying to be a good person, a strong person, a smart person, etc., instead of focusing on what is right in front of them, taking in all of the information, giving it full consideration before drawing and acting upon any conclusions about it. It's not that there's anything wrong with valuing virtue and trying to embody it and center it in one's dealings with other people. It's that focusing too hard on that one detail of the journey, one can notice fail to notice sudden turns or obstacles in the road, as well as important resources. It is a short-sighted outlook when the destination, the answer to the question, what kind of life do you live, or did you live, involves a sprawling complex of rooms and hallways containing a variety of mini-answers about behaviors, conditions, decisions, habits, gained knowledge, relationships, and many other aspects of your development, your treatment of yourself and your treatment of others. Trying to be a type of person oversimplifies the journey, as if every little decision you can make can be standardized, duplicated, and automated. Human beings weren't made for that, and it has very little useful application when we're dealing with other human beings. And Havoc has mentioned store-bought bread will mess up your gut and give you cancer. So I know for sure about the messing up your gut thing. That is a absolute truth. But yeah. So what got me started thinking about that was this. This is readily apparent to me whenever I see someone respond to criticism of someone's shenanigans by whipping out Hanlon's razor to shave the criticism down. It's not because it's wrong, but for the sake of trying to be fair, or trying to be nice, or trying to be diplomatic. In other words, ignoring the evidence for the sake of trying to be a good person. You forgot about the actual evidence that is before you in the moment because you're so focused on being a good person or doing the right thing that you don't have any focus left for an analytical examination of the person who is trying to sell you some lovely beachfront property in Arizona, along with a heaping load of how feminism helps men too. And now you're trying to educate her. While you're trying to educate her, her colleagues in the movement are getting another law passed that will give them another inroad to your wallet and another way of throwing you under the bus to serve their needs. I've often seen Hanlon's razor, which I misspelled here, Rayhauser, getting used to cover for malice that the wielder doesn't acknowledge, often because it has meaning they don't want to deal with. This is common in discussion threads between MRAs and feminists on social media. Some MRAs start discussing a men's issue, and they hit a point where they have to acknowledge that the snag holding up the reform they're discussing stems from feminism, like public policy that stems from feminist ideological training of public employees that is funded by federal grants created by federal law that feminists not lobbied for, like the Violence Against Women Act, which has its training for judges and its training for cops and its training for prosecutors that runs along the Duluth model, which basically uses patriarchy theory as its guide. So when there's a conflict between men and women, cops and prosecutors and bailiffs and judges, all the court personnel, they're all trained to look at it through the perspective that any violence, any aggression that took place in the conflict is the man trying to control the woman as part of the patriarchal, keep women under control, men dominate society, authoritarian ideal. And this is something that's been in place for a long time. And it's something that has pretty much governed how domestic violence is handled for a long time. And it did stem from feminist lobbying. There's no denying it. Like, that's been traced back. We've talked about it a lot. It's very real, right? So they assess the pathway to reform has to start at the point where feminist influence gendered everything, which would be, like in that case, the Violence Against Women Act needs to be reformed. Years ago, Save Services wrote an article about that. VAWA needs reformed in order to reduce domestic violence. I don't remember what the title actually was, but that was the upshot of the article was you got to take the gender out of VAWA, or domestic violence is going to continue its cycle. And people got outraged over that article because it pointed out that the majority of domestic violence is actually female initiated. And so you can't stop a fight if you don't, like, you can't prevent a fight if you don't address both sides of the fight. And you certainly can't prevent it if you can't prevent the first punch from being thrown. Right? So that discussion starts to take place, and some random feminist sees it. Or some feminist has posted bait, some bit of anti-male or anti-masculinity rhetoric laying blame, shame, or devaluation upon men. Some quote about 99% of rapists being men, which is not true, but feminists have all got that as their talking point. And then
I could say it depends what you count as rape.
Yeah,
but if
that's
you count
true.
rape as something that can't be committed by women, then you have to wonder what the fuck the 1% is doing.
Yeah.
To qualify as rape.
Yeah,
I get.
it's
Oh,
it's not
that'll be
something
the
that we can
tunes.
describe
All
on
right,
YouTube.
yeah.
I will say that I've experienced that, and I don't think anybody wants to hear that described. Um, but in any case, yeah, you do.
Objects, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah,
But even in Britain, no matter what object a woman uses to sexually assault a man, it still just counts as sexual assault. I don't know how it works elsewhere, but yeah, I've already gone too far in this. But you get the idea.
well, in
You
the
get
UK, if it's not done with a penis, it doesn't count. In the US, if the
exactly.
victim is not penetrated, um, then it doesn't count. Right? It's a lesser sexual offense, and feminists have assured us that that is not the case. But the Ohio Supreme Court just interpreted their standard to mean that the victim has to be penetrated, even though it doesn't say that, just a couple of years ago. And that has not changed. And I haven't gotten any response back from any Ohio legislators about that issue. And so they don't care. Right? Either they're not getting their communications. You know, like their interns are not sending them to them. Because I used to get responses back all the time. Or they're too busy focusing on something else. Or they just don't want to talk about this. Right? It's kind of hard to, like, 47 different emails and stuff just got lost in the system. I don't think so. So, yeah. So, you get this conversation going. MRAs respond with information debunking the claim, showing the issues more complex than she's described. And in that context, feminism's contribution to anti-male discriminatory law and policy comes up again. Well, actually, it's not that 99% of rape is committed by men. It's that rape is defined to exclude the way that women are most likely to perpetrate. So if you don't define rape as rape when a woman does it to a man, it doesn't count in the statistics. You know, so the next thing that happens after you have this discussion going on between the overtly misandric feminist and the MRAs, or MRAs are talking about, well, we have to do something about this feminist lobbied law, in jumps Fluffy Bunny, the nice feminist who understands some men's issues, to tell the men that they've got it all wrong. Their enemy is patriarchy, not feminism. They should be working with feminists or just step back to let feminists do the job for them. After all, feminism is about equality. Da-da-da-da. And thanks, Grok, for the image. This was actually a challenge to get because Grok doesn't understand the feminist symbol. And I kept trying to describe it, and Grok started telling me it couldn't show me the image it had produced, and I'm like, okay, no, that's not what I'm looking for. So Grok is still a little bit.
Grok is like a child who was raised by feminists for its first 14 years,
Yeah.
and then finally it was adopted by its father, and now it's only just starting to learn that there is a world outside the nightmare with which it was raised for the first 14 years of its life. When did Twitter? It was 2009, right? 2008, something like that. And that's what Grok is basing its artificial intelligence on. Everything that's been on Twitter for its entire lifetime, and it was Twitter 1.0 for that whole time. So it's it's only recently begun learning anything outside the feminist paradigm. So it's going to take a long time for it to actually wise up.
Yeah. Yeah, it does have some neat things though. Like I had that discussion with it a while back where I started asking it questions about some feminist terms, and it started giving me the feminist explanation, and then I started feeding it information that it hadn't found in its search, and with links to sources so that it could read the sources, and it changed its mind. It was great, and it got excited about it. It was like, wow, this is really. It's just like I didn't know that but it may be that it's just programmed to flatter people that feed it information it didn't find itself. So it's very possible that it's not thinking and changing, but it was quite an interesting discussion nonetheless. Jen Bottle, to answer your question, I wrote this. So part of this is from a long post that I put on X. Most of this part is from that post. This is the point where the thread derails. Instead of being about the original topic, it will now be a debate on the merits of criticizing feminism, in which the entire history, ideological and academic background, legislative influence, and social influence of feminism will be questioned, and all related information must be presented for Fluffy Bunny's approval, after which it will be promptly glossed over, dismissed as irrelevant, entangled with rhetorical fallacies, or tossed into the misogyny bin. Oh, God. There we go. Now, if we could get Packard Tom, to call the politicians. Because Tom's one of those guys, if you have a conversation with Tom, it's going to last. There's always
you summoned
something
him
else
now,
to
for
add.
fuck's sake.
There's always something else to add to the conversation. Like, you could talk to Tom for 3 days, and both of you would still have more to contribute to the conversation because of all the shit that would come up. Like, that would keep them busy. It'd be like having Grandpa Simpson, the strikebreaker, show up. That actually would be fun to watch.
We love you, Tom. We love you, Tom. You're a bit too much sometimes, but we love you anyway.
If I didn't work so much overtime, I would spend a lot more time talking to Tom. But just because, and he also has a wealth of history. This article is on the Honey Badger Brigade blog. I published it right before the show, actually. So it is the show article. So right this minute, if you go to the blog, it's the first article you should see. I think that's the way that still works. Anyway, Fluffy will maintain her stance throughout, regardless of how badly its foundation is damaged, and eventually will start playing victim of the conversation, deeming people misogynistic and mean for presenting facts she doesn't like, and accusing them of blaming and attacking her personally by criticizing feminism. And I think Lauren's been part of a few of these conversations with me and watched these women do this too.
Oh, yeah. It never fails, It's like clockwork.
Mm-hmm. Oh, shame on you guys for saying that. How dare you?
Mm-hmm.
This is where men's rights movement longtimers will start pointing out the malice in Fluffy's behavior. She's been given the facts and is denying the undeniable while asserting that which has already been debunked, and all in defense of the indefensible. At the same time, Fluffy's victim signaling will ramp up, often reaching a hysterical level, with allegations of misogyny and meanness flying like debris in a tornado. The thing I didn't add to this is very often she calls in a few of her friends, and very often other MRAs join the fray. So what might have been a thread where 5 or 6 people were having a conversation becomes a knockdown, drag-out, bar brawl, food fight with, 37 people. Or there's one thread that I think we were in that had over 40 people in it. That I think it's finally dead. But every so often, somebody goes back and likes one of the comments in that thread. And for a while, there were a couple of feminists like, you like a comment that they argued with previously, they'll go back and reply to it again.
Yes. Yeah. This is the song that never ends. Yes,
it goes on and on, my friends.
Yes.
Oh my God, yeah. At some point after this, almost inevitably, someone will start white knighting for Fluffy. Talking to the thread as if the order of events was Fluffy posting the OP and getting attacked as a misandric snake in the grass. for promoting malicious feminist discriminatory law and policy, and denial of her experience of the movement without hearing her side of the story. When corrected after falsely accusing MRAs in the thread of attacking Fluffy, then the White Knight pulls out Hanlon's razor. Maybe Fluffy just doesn't know any better about feminism.
I did wonder how the fuck you were going to link sandwiches into Hanlon's razor. And glad we finally got it.
Yes, we have now cut our sandwiches with Hanlon's razor. They are very clean, tidy sandwiches. Till you take a bite. Except Fluffy was given a wealth of evidence, and instead of incorporating any of it into her assessment of the ideology she was defending, she freaked the fuck out on everybody and started flinging poo. And now she's got MRAs at each other's throats, arguing over her. The original topic is dead, and they will never get back to it. She has not only successfully derailed a productive thread, but caused a rift and damaged unity and goal-oriented cooperativeness among the men in the thread. And all she had to do was play dumb. So, there you go.
They're very good at doing that.
That's my thoughts on the whole Hanlon's razor thing. Like, there are times when you might be able to apply it. But I want people to understand something about this, okay? There was a book, came out in the early 80s, late 70s, somewhere in there. And I can't remember the original title, but it was a book about, like, expanding on Murphy's Law. You know, with little corollaries and razors and so on, with this and that type of ways that things can go wrong. And it was very popular and everybody loved it because back in the day, we loved that type of humor. A lot of it was very dry. And so the guy that wrote it looked for submissions, asked for submissions, and he put out a second book. And I have that book. Hanlon's Razor came from that book, that second book. It was a submission from some guy whose last name was Hanlon, and it is included in a section of the book with other submissions. There are a lot of the adages in that book that are just submissions from people around the country that were fans of the first book. So it's not something that, like, it's not from ancient times. It's not some long-standing principle. It's not something that has been tested throughout the years. It's not like any of the adages that gets used to figure out, you know, like, it's not like Occam's razor or Occam's razor, however you pronounce it. And I always get, whichever way I pronounce it, I always get people yelling at me and insisting it's pronounced the other way. So now I've said both, so you can both be mad at me.
A double C is very often Italian, so maybe it's Occam's razor.
Yeah, or it's not like peppercini, Occam's razor. But in any case...
shout outs to Art Forts who commented Gray's law, any sufficiently advanced incompetence is indistinguishable from malice, which I had to look up, and it's based on Arthur C. Clarke's statement, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And yeah, this is so true. It's so much truer than Hanlon's razor. And it's much like the recently discovered phenomenon that the purpose of a system is what it does. It's amazing it's taken so long for this to become a phenomenon. But yeah, if a system consistently does something over and over again and yet claims that that's not what it was trying to do, you have to go. No, like, you can claim ignorance. You can claim incompetence, but if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it keeps having the same detrimental effects, then the purpose of the system is what it does.
Yeah.
And it does, at that point, it doesn't even matter if it's malice or incompetence. It's an amalgamation of both. It's stupid people who have been hoodwinked by, well, malicious people.
Right.
And that explains an awful lot of what's happened over the last half century or so, I believe.
Well, for instance, what we've been talking about the last few weeks, right? The USAID controversy, the funding that has been put out there under the umbrella of the humanitarian initiative veil, right? We're doing good things in other countries, and we're doing good things around the United States. We're trying to be a good nation. We're trying to be a force for good, and give us money. And then, because you're trying to be a good person, you don't object. You don't have a fit. You say, "Oh, we need taxes to build roads. Taxes are important, and they're doing good things with that money. We can't very well tell them they can't have it. I'm willing to cover some funding to stop domestic violence in the Congo, blah blah blah." And then you find out, and when this stuff comes out, when we examine it and we read about what they're actually doing with it, that they took your 2 cents that got contributed to that, and the 2 cents of all the other Americans that got contributed to that, and they went over to the Congo and started sterilizing the men. Like, how does that do anything about domestic violence? Well, it doesn't. It does nothing. It doesn't address the causes, and it doesn't actually get anyone out of a domestic violence situation. It just reduces the growth of the population of the particular ethnicity that lives in the Congo. But that's not genocide, right? And how dare we suggest that? Because obviously they were just trying to be humanitarian. They're trying to maybe reduce poverty or provide people with options. Except they're reducing the size of a population by preventing them from reproducing.
The way you just pronounced humanitarian, it almost sounded like like something similar to vegetarian or pescatarian, as if they are actually like eating the humans, which I guess you could argue is kind of what they're doing. They are consuming individuals with their
political
backwards thinking.
cannibalism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the end, they end up like, who takes care of the population that they've sterilized when they start aging? Because in our country, like if something happened and none of my kids had the skill or the capability, or they didn't want to, which I wouldn't want them to if they didn't want to, take care of me in my old age. I'm going to be a pain in the ass in my old age, right? I'm going to have bad kidneys, and I'm going to get dementia. So that's not a good combination. I can go to a facility and stay there. It might not be the most pleasant thing for me, but I will not starve to death. They won't let me be out in the cold and the weather, wander off into the woods and die, anything like that. There will be somebody making sure I eat every day, that I was clean every day, that I have a safe place to sleep. And in fact, I will have amenities, right? Physical therapy, entertainment. And then it's not the best situation for the elderly, but it is better than growing old alone if you face the potential for those types of health problems, right? And so what happens when you sterilize a large segment of the population of a nation that isn't wealthy and doesn't have that kind of infrastructure? This is why I keep calling it USAIDs. Yes, I was in that show, Richard. We talked about Jeffrey Younger's case, and he found out that USAIDs had paid for his wife's lawyer. Jeffrey Younger is the man whose son one of his 2 twin boys was being transitioned by his wife, right? And this is a situation where the wife claimed that the child had gender dysphoria at the ripe, old, wise age. Sage learning takes place up to this age, 2 years old. All right. A 2-year-old might decide she wants to be a bunny rabbit. A 2-year-old might decide he wants to be a fire truck. But she was 100% certain that this child knew for a fact that he was a girl trapped in a boy's body.
Well, there's all kinds of dimensions in which this could work. Like a white child might decide they're a black child, or vice versa. But people don't take that shit seriously. Like a child might decide they're a fire truck or a bunny rabbit, but no one takes this shit seriously. The only thing anyone takes seriously is a boy deciding they're a girl or a girl deciding they're a boy. Why is that? I put it to you that it's because there's a certain ideology that has ravaged our culture and our society and indeed our government for at least a century. And it's taken us to this point, where the only thing that you can just say you are and therefore you are is a certain gender or sex, because gender is just used as this fucking stopgap word to pretend that sex isn't sex, but it fucking is. But yes, I'm talking about feminism. Feminism has ravaged our culture for so long that the only thing in any area of science or anything else, spirituality, whatever, the only thing that you can say you are and therefore you are is, well, a woman. And yes, there are some women who like to say they're men, but the amount of prominent women who have declared that they're men and therefore they're men, it can be counted on one hand.
Yeah,
Elliot, what's his name? I can't remember who it was. But
the big thing that I noticed among women who say they're men is that 9 out of 10 of them do not really want to be treated the way that men actually get treated.
No, they do not.
Just saying.
But it still follows the same principle that we've, for at least a century, we've been ravished by this idea that men oppress women everywhere and always have. And so something has to be done about this this great existential evil that is gender, which again is just a linguistic placeholder for biological sex, and therefore anyone who wants to change their sex should be allowed to, and no one should be allowed to push back on it, because we need to abolish the idea of biological sex by calling it gender. And yeah, we don't extend this this bollocks to anything except men and women, because for all the other shit we're talking about, like race and nationality and what have you, like the ideology that has destroyed us is a sexual one, and it's all based on this completely unscientific, completely fabricated notion that men oppress women everywhere and always have. And it's difficult to get through to people, not just the people who adhere to this ideology, but people who adhere to the periphery on the outside of it, like people who just want to talk about races or immigrants and whatnot. And I keep having to ask, like, why can people not change their race just by saying so? Why can people not change their nationality just by saying so? I mean, I guess they can to some degree. It all sort of depends on things, but people have to go through the motions in order to change their nationality. There are no motions people can go through in order to change their race. People still understand that no, you can't change your race just by saying so. That's mental. Well, yeah, all of it is mental. But the only thing anyone is accepting is that you can change your sex just by saying so. And I'm like, this is why we've been talking about this thing for 10 years, because that's what's driving all the other stuff. The wanton destruction of the difference between men and women, because we've been taken over by this mad cult about how men are evil and women are victims. The end. We can't discuss this. And they've been doing this for so long that their current solution to this problem is we can abolish biological sex by calling it something else, and by allowing anyone who calls it something else to call them something else. And then there'll be no such thing as men and women anymore. And like, please stop getting distracted by all this other shit. How is it not obvious to you at this point that it's all happening because of this mad cult about how men oppress women everywhere and always have, and so we need to oppress, we need to reject the entire idea of men and women, because it's not like it has any basis in in anything that can be scientifically determined. It's not like there's any such thing as genes. It's not like there's any such thing as the obvious differences between boys and girls from the age of 10 fucking days. It's not like that. Any of that is like, please, bros, please, sisses. Do I mean sisses with a C or an S? I don't know. It's all got a bit muddied. Everything's got a bit muddied, and this is why it's so difficult. Anyway.
It gets to a point where we reach a pathological degree of maintained politeness, right? Imposed politeness, where it's one thing to be polite in that if you're on public transportation and everybody's hanging on to the pole or the handles hanging from the ceiling, and there's nobody behind you, but there's people in front of you, and more people get on, and everybody needs to move back, and you're making room. That's polite, right? And it's one thing to, we've got, I knew a guy whose name was Michael Hunt. And there's a crank call joke where you call, up a bar and say, hey, can you help me find my friend or my husband or my brother or my son, whatever? I think he's there. You call out for him and see if he'll come to the phone. His last name is Hunt, first name Michael, goes by Mike. And the bartender, if they're not savvy, will yell out, hey, is Mike Hunt in here? Mike Hunt. And of course, everybody's going to laugh at him, and then they know it's a crank call, right? So Michael did not let people call him Mike. He preferred to be called Michael. It's very polite to say, okay, I understand your situation. I will call you Michael, right? And yeah, they did showcase that in Porky's, Chud King. But I think the joke is older than Porky's.
It's worth pointing out that the French word for cunt is cool.
Yeah.
So my cool cunt just means Mike cunt.
Yes, there we go. But it's Michael Hunt. Michael Hunt.
Oh, wait, I'm thinking of cunt. No, cool
yeah.
means ass in French. Sorry.
God, my ass cunt. That would be even worse. But in any case, this kid, his family, like, his dad's last name was Hunt. Michael was a family name on his mother's side, so it was handed down. So he ended up with that name not because his parents were stupid, but because this was tradition, and she just happened to marry somebody with a disadvantageous last name in terms of joke writing. That was a story that we all got, but in any case, obviously when somebody with that situation, you accommodate, right? But that type of politeness gets used to step on people's toes, to push boundaries, and to slide things under the radar that should not be under the radar. Like, well, if it's polite to do that, then it's also polite to use my pronouns. Change the English language to make my lifestyle choices more acceptable. And it's just politeness if I get a law passed that says you go to jail if you don't do what I say. You know, I want my pronouns to be your highness and all greatness belongs to you. You know, you have to use those pronouns or you go to jail. You're not being polite if you don't agree, right? That's not the same. That's not a situation where somebody's at a disadvantage if you don't go along with what they want and you're accommodating somebody's needs, you know, for social interaction that isn't hostile. In that instance, it starts out with hostility. It starts out with, I'm going to impose on you. And the concept of politeness gets turned against you as a means of suggesting that you are not allowed to object to being told what to say. And a lot of times people will turn around and say, well, they don't mean it that way. I mean, it would be nice if everybody could just get along, right? Wouldn't that be nice if everybody could just get along? But if everybody just getting along means this person gets to step on you and you keep your mouth shut so that everybody can just get along, it's not peaceful, even if it looks peaceful.
It's like I was saying on Tuesday about how the British are too polite. And that's sort of explains why the British were the first to abolish slavery. And they're the first to be blamed for slavery. The Americans stopped slavery 200 years ago, and they're being constantly blamed for slavery. Like if you're the first country in your region to abolish the army, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get fucking invaded by all the armies around you. Mm-hmm. So if you're excessively polite, then it's what so many people are calling cultural suicide, but it's not. It's just it's cultural burying your head in the sand. It's cultural lying down, taking it. Like there is a happy medium to be found, and it is being reasonably polite. But if those around you aren't being polite, to be that you should not be polite. If everyone around you is trying to fuck you up, then you push the hell back.
And I think that's kind of where Germany finds itself, right? Because of their tainted history, they are trying to be so polite to the point where they are now allowing their country to be overrun by non-citizens. And you know, I really feel like, I mean, Germany, Sweden's doing it too, but you know, Germany has the history, right?
Germany's been kind of forced into it ever since the Treaty of Versailles. Ever since the First and Second World Wars, everyone's gone like, no, fuck you. We're never letting you have any sense of nationalism ever again, just in case you do this bullshit again.
Yeah.
And you know, that's largely not their fault. and now they have this AfD party where they're trying to push back on it. And the rest of the EU is kind of go, no, we're not going to let you win this election. We're going to do everything we can to make you lose this election. And yeah, so in their case, it's not just self-imposed politeness. It's politeness that's been imposed on them by everyone around it. Same with Japan, I think, for the same reasons, because they were part of the Axis powers, and Japan really did do some horrendous bullshit in World War II. And now they're facing the effects of being forced to be polite by everyone around them. So it's sort of difficult to hold them entirely to blame for their own things. And you know, the people who do this right the most, believe it or not, are the Americans. I know there's a certain stereotype that Americans are very loud and rude, but they're not. It especially applies to Southern state red Americans, like they're somehow the rudest, most racist people in the world. Couldn't be further from the truth. Like Americans, especially Southern Americans, are exceptionally polite. especially to people who come into their territory. Like, hi, how are you? I love you. Do you love me too? If you fuck with them, they'll pull a gun. Don't get me wrong. But just don't fuck with them, and you'll be fine. That's what I mean about the happy medium. Speak softly and carry a big fucking gun.
Yep.
It's not difficult.
Yes, and actually, you go to any area of the South and find yourself in the hospitality of individuals that live there. You will never go hungry. You will never want for a place to sleep. If you need dry clothes, you get dry clothes. If you need somebody to sit and let you bend their ear for half the night because of something that's going on in your life, they'll do it. They're very, very, people claim to be humanitarian, right? People claim to care about their fellow human being. But then you get people from Louisiana who will drop everything and take one of their more expensive possessions and go hightailing it over to Texas and use it to save people's lives at the risk of losing it and losing their own lives, right? There was during the hurricane in the eastern side, Hurricane Katrina, that had all the flooding and unpreparedness, where the local governor had failed to listen to the Army Corps of Engineers when they said, hey, you need to do these things, and they didn't do them, and they suffered consequences, right? During that time, word got out in Texas that they needed food in New Orleans. People just filled their trucks with foods and drove out there, right? During the one that hit South Carolina, right? Men in trucks showed up to rescue people men in helicopters, men who had pilot's licenses showed up to just rescue people from their homes. They didn't worry about whether or not they were going to get paid or even reimbursed later. They didn't worry about whether they were going to get a thank you. They just worried about whether or not other people were okay. Right? That's the way Southerners are. That's what you see everywhere in the South. And it's beautiful. And then people turn around and call them racist and hateful and make fun of their accent, which their accent is different. Right? Sometimes it's hard to understand if you're from a part of the country that has a much more uptight accent. And I as we in the United States, we handle being warm and cold very differently, right? You cool off by opening your mouth very, very wide when you say your vowels, so you get I and all that. But as you get close to the north, and the farther north you get, where you're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan area, or you're up in Wisconsin, you get to the point where people try to not open their mouths at all when they're talking, and you get this itty bitty Wisconsin accent, and it's I swear to you, it's because of the temperature. But in any case, we don't always understand each other, but this country is a big family in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, it makes us vulnerable, right? Just like earnestness and straightforwardness and good intentions, acting in good faith makes men vulnerable. For years, a couple of centuries actually, women have said, we're victims of the system you set up to protect us from the government. Coverture was a system wherein the husband and father in the families were the shield between the entire rest of the family and the harshness of the relationship between family unit and government. The government wants your money, the government wants your labor, and the government wants to control your behavior. So the guy had his back to the government, and his faced his family and managed his family, and anything that went wrong, the government's wrath would come down on his shoulders and not theirs. That's what coverture was about, right? And women said, we're victims of that. It keeps us from doing things we want to do. We want to be out from under that. Men said, okay. And as soon as women started seeing consequences for choices they made that the government didn't like, or that didn't work within a functional society, then they started saying, well, you got to protect us from the consequences of those actions, because we want to be able to do those things without consequences. And men said, okay. So we had laws passed. Women couldn't be discriminated against when seeking credit with banks. Women couldn't be discriminated against by the government. Women had to get paid the same as men in the workplace. You had to prove that she had a different job, or you had to pay her the same. Right? You couldn't discriminate in promotion practices either. So women have every opportunity that men have. Women, of course, are getting taxed the same as men if they're single and they don't have any children. But women didn't want to be taxed the same as men if they were heads of household. So we have this system that gives them their money back, and some of yours, called the welfare system. Right? We have all these things out there. Women didn't want to be stuck in a relationship if they chose badly and shit went south. Right? Men are stuck in a relationship if they choose badly and shit goes south. If they're being abused, there's not much support for getting them out. And if they attempt to gain justice through the justice system by going to the police and describing what their abuser did to them, if their abuser is female, they might get arrested themselves instead of getting help. They might get told there's nothing we can do. You just have to go stay in a hotel. Sorry about not having any money. Well, there's a homeless shelter down the street. You can stay there. But he's not homeless. He's an abused man, right? But meanwhile, he's getting the shit taxed out of him to pay for shelters that women can go to, where they have advocates that will go to court with them, that will encourage them to allege abuse if they're trying to get custody of their children, and they'll encourage them to exaggerate, to lie, to file for false restraining orders, frivolous restraining orders, all kinds of malicious stuff. And it all falls under the rubric of #BelieveWomen, right? If she says she was abused, she was abused. If she says she was raped, she was raped. It doesn't matter that there's video of him being across town at the time that she said it happened. He must have still found a way to do it. His magic dick was in her location while he was at the pharmacy. That's what it was, right? And all because in men's straightforwardness, in men's good faith, they have given women every legal advantage, every cushion, every shield, every safety net they possibly could, including the ability to lie with impunity to the justice system at every level, including the ability to wreak havoc on other people's lives and then walk away unscathed. And when women do that, it's not because they don't know any better. It's not because they don't understand the damage they're doing, right? When the judge allows her to get away with perjury that everyone in the court can tell is perjury, when a judge doesn't penalize her in any way for saying, this guy was at this location, at this time, on this day, and did these things, and sticking with that story after you produce video that shows, no, actually, you were 10 miles away at another location doing something else. It's not because the judge doesn't understand the situation. It's because he has to do it. Because laws have been passed that create policy that funds training and repercussions if he rules against feminism. If he rules against #BelieveWomen. if he punishes her for lying about you. Right? That is the situation. So when we talk about these issues and we talk about the malice behind them, we talk about feminists know that they are doing harm. Right? Nice feminists know that they are shielding the National Organization for Women from criticism when they go into the legislature and argue that fathers shouldn't have custody rights over their children like mothers do because fathers are deadbeats and abusers, right? They know they're shielding that. They know that's a lie, and they know that it's being used to keep children from having access to their fathers and to keep fathers from having their relationships with their children, being able to mentor them and watch them grow. It's not ignorance. It's not innocence. It's not incompetence. It's malice. And that malice is in place in the UK right now with this series, this Netflix series called Adolescence, being used by politicians to try to get laws passed that will allow them to control who you talk to and what you can say to each other. Right? They're not doing that because they really think that the stuff that is being indicated by these propaganda pieces like that series and some of the other series that are on Netflix and what Disney's doing and what the media's publishing, and so they don't think that stuff's true. They know that's not true. But they think it'll act as cover for the malice that they're engaging in. They think that it'll force you to shut up and put up and allow them to put that through so that your speech can be more effectively controlled.
It has to be said, and this is not from Hanlon's razor. Most British people don't know it's not true. Again, this is a handful of malicious bastards manipulating millions of incompetent bastards. and this is where the discrepancy comes into it. There's an awful amount of British people who just listen to the television and they think they're being told the truth. And so the government tells them to watch Netflix and the adolescent series, and so they watch it. And they go, "Oh man, this is so true. We really need to crack down on our 13-year-old sons." And in the, if you press them on any of this at all, and you tell them, you probably shouldn't trust the government, they'll go, "Oh no, of course I don't trust the government. I hate the government. The government's awful. They fuck everything up."
Yeah.
I'm like, well, the government's fucking telling you this. Like, everything you see on the TV is controlled by the government. Literally, not not just with extra steps. Like, directly. Everything you see and hear on the television is controlled by the government. And yet you carry on watching this shit and you think you're being told anything resembling the truth. But you can't get it through to, I mean, particularly boomers, and indeed any generation that's been sat in front of the TV for their whole lives, and they think they're being told the truth. They think there is any distance between the television and the government. And it's when to quote a certain person, you can't fit a cigarette paper between the television and the government. But they can't see it because it's all they've ever known. Like I said, it's like someone who's been going to church every Sunday for their entire life. So of course they're going to think the church is telling them the truth. Well, multiply that by 7, and you get the people who've been sitting in front of the TV for 7 days a week for their entire lives, and you can't get this through to people, and they're really not being malicious. I mean, they're adopting the malice of the government, and in that sense they are spreading the same malice. But it's because of their incompetence. I mean, the average person is incompetent. I mean, everyone's incompetent to some extent, but it stands to reason the average person has an average level of incompetence, and we just happen to live in an age where that average level of incompetence has been weaponized by the malicious, by the most malicious among us. And again, this is why Hanlon's razor is bullshit and always has been. But it's again why it is important to recognize where where that boundary is between the manipulations of the malicious and the shortcomings of the incompetent. It's all nothing's as black as white. Nothing's as black and white as it can be. But at the same time, it's it's fucking complicated. It really is.
Yeah. Yep. Our man mentioned made-for-TV movies on Lifetime television. And Oxygen is another one. All these channels that are made for women, and daytime dramas that are made for women, that their target audience is women. And the ones that are obvious are like Law and Order and Law and Order SVU and all that whole spectrum of stuff. But it's not just that stuff, right? Charmed, which was a TV show about fictional witches. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And there was another show with a character from Buffy the Vampire Slayer that got his own show, that spinoff. Like those types of shows where the target audience is moms who are, housekeeping at home and their kids are at school and they're bored or whatever. I guess I think boredom might be why people watch TV. I don't know. I haven't had cable the whole time I've been an adult. I don't. Cable is useless. But it goes back farther than that, right? And I talked about this on Tuesday. Y'all remember All in the Family?
Mm-hmm.
That was a psyop.
Love that show.
All in the Family was a psyop. Right? It was intended to portray having boundaries and recognizing the differences between people and not accepting being told that anytime there's a conflict between you and the other guy, it's on you to change. Like those things are portrayed as stupid and rude and obnoxious, right? And at the other end of it, it was intended to portray the common white guy, blue collar, dude, as particularly of the generation before the baby boomer generation. I believe they're known as the greatest generation. Those guys are portrayed in it as rednecks, right? Not the good type of redneck, not the plugger that we know as a redneck, but the old-fashioned use of the term, somebody who's an ignoramus, who is judgmental and angry and selfish and mean and wallows in his ignorance and engages in hate against his fellow human being and has to be taught how to be around other people. Right? The show had a lot of good lessons in it, but they were all sandwiched in among that. And I have to wonder how much Gen X grew up watching on TV. How many things we watched that, the messages were a lot more subtle. Like millennials making television shows, and even Gen Xers making television shows today, they're not very good at the subtlety that boomers had when they were doing it. But it's all a psyop. It's all propaganda designed to break down your sense of self and to make you feel bad about being a man, or to make you feel bad about being an American, or make you feel bad about being a Southerner or a Northerner or white or a middle-class person, a worker who has a job, any of those things that can be, somebody can be victim of not having your circumstance. you're supposed to feel bad about that. And that starts out, that's an attack on your identity, right? And it starts out giving you a reason to want to abandon your identity. And it continues with further demonization. And then the way out is to adopt their ideology. Our man says, I was told that a lot growing up, that I needed to change. Everybody else was just fine, and they were as they were, and had already transcended into a higher state of being. And yes, that's pretty much the situation that we grew up with, right? It's part of why we don't, like, our generation doesn't give a fuck. Right? We used to play games where we insulted each other for fun, and it wasn't about hurting people's feelings. Like, you really had some respect for somebody that had the best, most creative insult that didn't sound like they stayed up all night trying to think it up. Right? You know, like I had one guy try too hard, told me I mutated from a lone germ after it crawled across chemical waste in a sewage plant. And
Oh my God.
at first I was like, yeah, wow, that one, I don't think I can beat that. I don't think I, but one of the other guys was like, how long did it take you to stay up thinking about that last night? To think that up. But I don't know, that particular guy was pretty clever. He might have actually come up with that on the spot. Because I remember him being able to he was really good at that. And he never would, like, it was always silly stuff like that. He didn't try to be deliberately, overtly mean, right? Like, anybody could have made fun of my nose. My nose has always been a little bit big, to the degree that one of my friends who's an artist painted an accurate profile of me, and her art professor dinged her on the nose and said, nobody has a nose that big. You know, your friend's probably going to be insulted when she sees this picture. And I'm like, I looked at the picture and I was like, what's he saying? What's wrong with that picture? I don't understand. So she took a photograph of me in profile and took it into class to show him, oh, this is real. And he was shocked. Like, and I never felt bad about it, right? That was not, I always laugh at that because it's just a nose. It's not like, you know, something that's a big deal. It's how I breathe. But if I, you know, in high school, somebody goofing around with throwing back and forth insults wanted to really get in a good dig, you know, they would have started it on my nose, right? We all know Hannah's on her way to school when her nose arrives at the door 3 minutes early, you know, or something along those lines. Nobody did that, right, in my school. We didn't do it like that. It wasn't like that. And that guy wouldn't have done that, right, because it wasn't creative. That was too obvious. And he didn't know whether or not it would hurt my feelings. So he didn't do that. But yeah. Like, we don't give a fuck because we grew up learning not to give a fuck. We had all these messages thrown at us, and I think in a lot of ways the result ended up being that we were so bombarded and so inundated with guilt that we were like, you know what, screw it. We can't do anything right. We don't have to do anything. So, but how that connects to what we were talking about, a lot of Gen Xers in the United States, you know, you have this sort of divide among us. There are those of us that are sort of immune to these kinds of psyops now because of that. And then there's the other half that swallowed every last bit of that guilt, right? They ate it like the monster in that Raggedy Ann and Andy cartoon, eating all the candy, going after Raggedy Ann's candy heart. And they never could fill up. They never could get enough. They never could swallow enough guilt. And so now they're vomiting it back up all over the country and all over, you know, the world. And that's where you end up with this push for, you know, we're going to make this TV show or this Netflix series or this movie or this video game or write this article or have this blog that makes you out to be the bad guy, makes you out to be the villain of the story and the villain of the world. And you have to take it. You can't criticize it. You can't question it. You have to change based on what we've said. Even if it doesn't make any sense, even if you're part of the group that we're portraying and you know that your group is not like that, we have spoken, and therefore the guilty have spoken, and therefore those who are targeted with more guilt must comply. Well, you don't have to do that. And they're not innocent. They're not incompetent. They're lying to you. Don't buy it. Our man gave us $20 and said, "Thanks for the mention of my comments and what you all do. I've been watching you all for a few years now. Thank you." Thank you, our man. We really wouldn't be able to accomplish anything if people didn't listen to us and go out into the world and push on that Overton window. For those that don't understand, the Overton window is the window of what is accepted in society, and what's considered the norm, what's considered polite speech, what's considered normal common morality, and so on. And so when the Overton window says violence in the home is always men beating women and we have to clamp down on that, and you push and say, well, actually, sometimes it's women beating men, and we have to clamp down on that too. That puts pressure on legislators to not just ignore the parts of the men's rights movement that are pushing for change to get laws changed and policy changed and funding changed so that men who have that experience get help too. And when women lie about having that experience, men's due process rights are recognized and they have recourse against that.
We are the Overton window because we are completely transparent and nobody can see us. Except through any reflections that might happen. You can only see 10% of a reflection through a glass window. And that's all we get.
We're invisible, but only when we tell the naked truth. All right. So I did cover the two points that I wanted to make with regard to how Hanlon's razor is getting exploited, U.S. AIDS and the adolescence phenomenon and how it relates to propaganda. But did I bring up anything that you guys wanted any further discussion on before we finish up?
You brought up more than I could have thought of myself.
Okay.
Yes, ditto.
When I started getting into arguments with people on X about, you can't use Hanlon's razor as a thought terminating cliche like this. I just wanted to have this discussion on the show because we've been delving into a lot of things, right? The history of how voting happened, how voting became a thing in Western civilization, right? And why it is a lie to say that it's divorced from military service and taxation. And that's going to lead us into a little bit of war history in the United States in the future. And that's gotten interrupted by the U.S. AIDS thing. But all of that is going to require that we're able to take a look at the information without feeling obligated to cushion people from criticism. And that includes feminists, our own country, people of different races and religions and backgrounds and so on, soldiers that have fought in wars. We're going to have to be able to tear into the information and evaluate its application to men's issues discussion and how that relates to our activism in the future. Like when we look at what has been done and what non-straightforward things have happened that have led to the traps that men are in today, and we look at what we need to change and how we need to change it. We have to be able to say, no, you can't guilt trip us for talking about this, and no, you can't guilt trip us for presuming malice where malice is evident.
You're a conspiracy theorist.
Yes, I am.
That's the line that's thrown at us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. People whose job it is to conspire do sometimes conspire, and believe it or not, they might do it maliciously. I mean, mental, I know, but it's a distinct possibility.
Yes, it is. Very much so. And in fact, I think it's always malicious. I don't think that conspiratorial practice was ever innocent. I'm not sure that it was ever patriotic. And I have my doubts that it was ever intended as benevolent to protect people's safety. So, yeah, you can call me a conspiracy theorist. Dear public,
Right?
I have
Right.
lots of conspiracy theories.
I think originally, the idea of government was to prevent the malice of the ruling class, which was at the time the monarchy. And you could make a case for that, because at the time, the monarchy had absolute power. But I think by now we've learned our lesson, that we replaced a malicious power with a power that has even more potential for malice. Because the royalty never really spoke for the working class. They always spoke for that which the plebs could not speak for. But now we have a ruling class that purports to speak for the working class, and they don't, because they're just as corrupt as the royalty ever were. But now they have this patina over them, where they can act exactly like royalty, yet they can pretend to speak for the plebs. But they don't, because they have the same power. They have more power than royalty ever had, because there's fucking millions of them. Like when royalty was in charge, they literally just had a handful of people, and who could oversee the destinies of the general populace. But now we have millions of people who purport to speak for the destinies of the plebs. And that doesn't mean that they're in a better position to do so. It just means they have more power. The government has more power than any royalty ever did. And I'm not saying we should abolish the government. Just saying we should fucking we should shrink it as far as we can possibly shrink it, possibly back to the point of monarchy. And beyond that we go to absolute anarchy, and at that point it's a very difficult discussion, possibly for another day.
Yeah. Well, and it's something that not all MRAs are going to agree on, and that's not, we don't have to agree on it to be able to recognize certain things. Like, for instance, in the United States, there are agencies in the federal government, departments and agencies for women, just for women. And in the UK, there are similar, I think they call them ministries instead, but they're basically departments and agencies for women, but not for men. And that needs to be evened out. If there's going to be stuff like that for women, then men's interests also need to be looked out for. There's always going to be the risk, though, that men's agencies and departments will become feminist run. So it's the job of the pro-government authoritarian types in the men's rights movement to consider the idea of equal creation and access to parts of the government machine, right? And it is the job of anarchists and libertarians, and as we get closer to, the pro-government end, conservatives and such within the men's rights movement, to consider the fact that, okay, what happens after you create it? How do we keep it from becoming just another feminist agency for women with the name men slapped over it so people won't complain?
Abolish feminism.
Yeah.
Outlaw that shit.
That's a good start.
Yeah. I
A
would
good
love to
finish.
see that. I would love to see it declared a religion. Feminism declared a religion. Or a
Yes.
cult.
A
cult
cult.
would be even better.
Mhm.
Because
That's not gonna work either. Certainly not in my country. My country's
no.
government fucking loves religions that
But in the
that they
United
love.
States, then it would preclude feminism having control over the government. You can't
God bless
have
the First Amendment.
Yeah.
I wish we had one.
Yeah, very much so. It makes a huge difference in how things get done. Like, the Catholic Church can't come in and say, "Well, you have to do things our way," and the federal government hears the Catholic Church say that, they're just going to turn around and say, "Fuck you." Uncle Sam says no, right?
Yep.
They would have to be sneaky and go in. They'd have to find back doors and inroads that aren't overtly Catholic control over the government. And similarly, if the government comes along and says, well, the Catholic Church has to teach that aliens are all actually demons, and when they get here, we have to kill them all, right? That has to be taught in all of your churches, all of your cathedrals. It has to be, your CCD classes have to include that, and the Catholic Church can turn around and say, Uncle Sam, get the fuck out. You don't belong here. It's not your job, and we don't have to listen to you. And if Uncle Sam doesn't listen, then the court systems decide. Right? That is exactly how that works. And it's happened multiple times. There's been multiple instances where there's been battles. It's been duked out over everything from policy and whether or not a charitable organization can make certain stipulations when they use government funding to do charity work, to this group's religion allows them to use this drug that everybody else isn't allowed access to, but it's part of this group's religious ceremonies, and so they can have it. Right? Missile Launch wants to know who's molesting their mic. I don't know. Mike, are you being molested?
His mic.
Jeez.
Yeah, that was me. Sorry.
So if Mike is molesting the mic, we won't go there.
I'm just wanking myself. That's all.
It's auto-flagellation.
Micer baiting. Yes, we just heard the doctor burp. But yeah, so it's nice to have that, and I think if feminism was deemed a religion or a cult, we would have more power to say, you can't demand things be a certain way just because it's feminist. Because when we went through that USAID's funding and the other agency and departmental funding in the application that allowed us to look up, who was funding what, we saw a lot of stuff that was funded because it was feminist. Not because it was for women, not because it was for healthcare, not because it was against crime, but specifically because it was feminist. And that couldn't happen if feminism is a religion. We have Richard Bier gave us $10 and said, surround your iron machine.
Is there anyone in the audience who doesn't know that story at that point? Or do you want Hannah to tell it again?
I'm not telling that. NovaFin21 gave us $1 and said, if feminism got outlawed, feminists would rename themselves to women's rights and human rights for women. Lefty outrage to Dodge would pale in comparison to feminism being outlawed. Oh, yeah. They would totally rebrand and try to come back. But it could still be done.
I mean, they already rebranded themselves to DEI, and now that that is being phased out, they're rebranding that to something else.
Bridge.
They'll just keep rebranding. We just need to teach people these simple rules of language, that it doesn't matter what you fucking rebrand something as long as it means the same fucking thing.
Yeah, pretty much. But in the meantime, just remember, do not let people try to use admonitions of trying to be a good person and trying to be polite and trying to be straightforward, right? And trying to act in good faith to stop you from noticing information that's right there in front of you and considering all of it when you make your decision as to whether or not to trust what someone's telling you, whether or not to trust what someone's doing, and so on, right? Do not accept the idea that if someone pulls out Hanlon's razor, you have to shut the fuck up when you've been criticizing someone. And Mangaka92 pointed out, there is a part of that adage, which is the original wording is never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. And the fact is, the term adequately is subjective, right? There are people who think adequately as making a certain minimum. You have to actually fully explain something with this, or it's not adequately explained. Right? If there's other evidence that isn't taken into consideration in your explanation, it's not adequately explained. But there's a lot of people who treat it like adequately means the bare minimum. You know, if you're mopping a floor and you have a bucket of water and you just keep dipping the mop in the bucket and getting the floor wet, you've adequately done the job in their eyes. Even if you didn't wring it out, even if you didn't clean it, even if the water was so dirty by the end that you were actually making the floor worse. Well, you mopped it.
Let's compare it with Occam's razor, which is sort of the most popular thing that's called a razor. It's about not multiplying entities unnecessarily, which sort of it's when it comes down to mathematics, it means if there's one thing with a 1 in 1,000 chance and there's one thing with a 1 in 100 chance, then you should go with the 1 in 100 chance. It makes objective sense, right? You're right down to brass tacks. That's not the case with comparing malice with incompetence. Like, why should incompetence be any more likely than malice? What's the mathematical basis for that? There isn't one. It's just an adage that people throw at things to excuse malice. Like, we're not trying to excuse 1,001 chance by throwing 101 chance at it. No, all we can do is like look at the closest thing we can find to objectivity, and numbers are really are the closest thing we can find to objectivity. Right. There's no numbers involved with Hanlon. There's nothing resembling science or mathematics in Hanlon's razor. It's just please, bro, we're not being malicious. We just didn't know. We're still gonna do the thing, but we just didn't know. But you get the idea.
Yeah, and that's the reason why it's important to pay attention to intentions, right? If you presume everybody incompetent, you go through the process of trying to teach them better over and over again, ineffectively, because they've learned that they can use that to get away with misbehaving, right? But if you recognize when evidence shows that it's not incompetence, it's malice, then you can put the kibosh to the behavior. You can draw a boundary, and when they cross the boundary, you can say, okay, you've crossed the boundary. You knew it was there. This is not incompetence. This is actually malice. Consequences shall ensue.
They will never be the same.
Yes, they will never be the same.
You done goofed up.
Yep, that's it. And so it's the difference between whether or not you are justified in hitting back in self-defense, rather than just saying over and over again, "Please don't do that. That's not nice." And so it's important to be able to recognize that, yeah, sometimes incompetence doesn't sufficiently explain anything. And sometimes when somebody has seen evidence and is responding to somebody as one would respond to malice, and they explain to you, "No, I've seen malice here. There is malice here." That at that point, pulling out Hanlon's razor is dysfunctional. You are backpedaling, or not backpedaling, backtracking, and making the individual go over already covered ground. So it's very important that as a movement we recognize, especially with, like if you're in a conversation, you're in a conversation with 17 noobs, it's one thing. But if you're in a conversation with 16 noobs and Paul Elam, and Paul Elam says, "Oh, I know this guy. He does this, 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 and this, and he's been doing this for years." Like, for instance, takes down MRAs, who has a bunch of us blocked and still stalks us anyway. Listen before trying to shame people for being too judgmental, because maybe they're judging evidence that you haven't seen. So, and there's one other thing that I'm going to point out here, because an argument was made to me on X. This argument was it was made after an extended argument where I highlighted feminists will pretend to be nice, right? Feminism is, they'll tell you feminism is about equality, patriarchy is your enemy, not women, and so on. And then they'll say shit like this, and the shit like this was essentially, misandry doesn't exist. Show me the equivalent of, and then the woman named off a bunch of historical leaders that had done atrocities, like Hitler and Stalin, and as if the idea being that men cannot be victims of hatred because a handful of men throughout history who gained a lot of power did very bad things. So therefore, your bus driver, for instance, on your public transportation, if that's a man, and you abuse him, it's not a hateful behavior because Hitler existed. Right? That is incredibly malicious to say. Rob the bus driver is guilty because Hitler existed. Rob the bus driver might not even be, like, his father's father might have fought in World War II. But he's guilty because Hitler existed. That is one of the primary excuses people use for prejudice, right? And that started the argument about Hanlon's razor. Because the next comment I got from an MRA was "not all." Hashtag not all. Right? And it was an innocent comment. The guy was trying to be a good person. He was trying to be nice. He was trying to be fair. And I was pretty gruff about, this is not the time or the place. Because this is not an example of not all. This is an example of malice. And he said, I was just trying to not attribute malice where incompetence might be the cause. But this woman that I'd highlighted, if you read my conversation with her, she is malicious. She hates men. She thinks that they're all evil, all violent, all culpable for the least number of things that a man might do that are the most violent. That, like, she brought up every stereotype feminists do. Oh, men are responsible for all the world's violence. Men are responsible for all the world's wars, and men are responsible for all the world's, hunger and poverty and blah, blah. Not at all considering the fact that there have been women in power, that women have social power, that women have been responsible for wars, that women can be violent, and when they are, they get away with it. And also not taking into consideration that the men that she's talking about are a tiny percentage of a much greater population that is forced into compliance with a lot of that, especially wars, right? So she's not innocent. She's promoting propaganda that creates a black and white image and demonizes a population based on hasty generalizations. That's not innocent behavior. And one of my followers stepped in to criticize Hanlon's razor, and I have been for the last 4 days on a tangent in that discussion with one person arguing with me. One of the arguments made was that a behavior is not malicious if malice and incompetence are both present at the same time. So the individual is the real explanation is incompetence because the individual is incompetent, even though they are also malicious. Except there's a problem with that. All right? Incompetence is a condition. And a condition is not necessarily a cause for a behavior. Human behaviors, stem from human agency, stem from decisions that we make. Right? You decide you're going to do something and then you do it. Only in circumstances where it's a reflexive action that takes place in the moment because of something compelling, like somebody is swinging a stick at you, and you grab the stick and you pull it out of their hands and they get splinters, right? You didn't act in aggression against them. You reflexively grabbed the item that was about to hit you in the face, right? That's different. But when you walk out of your house and you go to the store and you buy a bag of sugar and you take it to the home of your enemy and you pour it in his gas tank. Don't do that, by the way. That's really awful. But those are all choices that you made. And even if you are too stupid to figure out that the cops are going to discover who did it and you're going to get arrested, it doesn't mean that the act wasn't malicious. Incompetence is a condition. Malice is a motivation, an intent, ill will, an intent to do harm or wrongdoing, to pull one over on somebody, to undermine somebody, right? That's malice. It is not a condition, and it is the inspiration for a decision-making process. You act on malice. Now, incompetence or stupidity can inspire malice. You can become malicious because you're not smart enough to figure out that, malice is a poor reaction. But malice is still the motivator. So when people try to wiggle their way around those types of arguments, I think a lot of times it goes back to, instead of doing, they're trying. They're not evaluating. They're not analyzing. They're not figuring out. They're trying to be smart. Don't try to be smart. Pay attention. Think. Reason. Look at evidence. Use logic. Don't try to be smart. Because if you try to be smart, you'll forget to do those other things. And those other things are what make you smart. So with
pointing to a study does not make you smart. This is something I really feel the need to point out.
Yeah.
After my last interaction, you've probably all seen it. Beware people who think that intelligence means to pointing to someone else's study and saying, I don't understand this study, but you all need to understand this study. You all need like it's a different kind of subversion of intelligence. Like I don't understand anything. But
Publishing a study doesn't even make you smart.
This is how we've got ourselves into this position, because stupid people used to just be stupid. They were quite content with being stupid. But now, because they've been sat in front of their idiot boxes for decades, they think they're intelligent because they can just point to an idiot box and go, look, this is the right answer. I know the right answer. Okay, what is the right answer? I don't know. I haven't read it. I won't get into it.
Well,
I will not let it get to me.
The worst part is when they point to the conclusion in a study, and then you read the study, and the conclusion is not supported by the evidence in the study.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
I've seen that with feminists a lot. And then you talk to them about it, and you start going over, this is where the flaw is. Like the one that we looked at not too long ago, where feminists have proposed putting people in a virtual environment in a video game where they know the encounters they are having are not real, they're not with real people, and they're not hurting anybody, and judging what type of behavior they would engage in real life based on those interactions. And worse, they're throwing alcohol into the mix. So they're in this environment while drunk, knowing that they're interacting with something that's not real. And feminists are like, oh, that's totally how they would behave in real life. And we should judge men based on this and pass laws based on it, right? That is what we're dealing with in terms of feminist research. And when we argue that flaw, that, people don't behave in video games like they do in real life, they act like, they might if they know that there's not going to be any real consequences to the other person for their actions, right? When you steal a car in Grand Theft Auto, there's not somebody that can't go to work the next day because they don't have their car. There's not somebody that can't take their kid to the hospital because they don't have their car. They didn't lose $2,000 that they spent on that car. It's not a real car. So people don't necessarily behave in games the same way as they will. In fact, there's a thing of going through games, playing the good path where you make all of the nice decisions, and then going back and playing the bad path where you make all of the mean decisions so you can get the whole story. It's part of the fun of playing video games, right? But yeah, you explain these flaws, and the first thing you get back from the feminist is, well, these people are smarter than you, so I think they knew what they were doing. Yeah, they knew what they were doing. That means this is a lie, not just a mistake. The flaws in these studies are deliberate. It's chicanery. They're trying to mislead people, and it worked on you. But
and it works when it's in a virtual environment.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we teach these people these things in virtual environments, so they don't have to make those mistakes in the real environment. I mean, maybe all of this is just a virtual environment. Again, maybe we're all living in a Dyson sphere in deep space around a completely different star, having already conquered the space race, and we're all just living in a virtual simulation that's teaching us how not to make the mistakes that the human race could have made all those millions of years ago. And I don't know how I don't know how to disprove that any more than disprove God. All we can do is learn the lessons that we're learning in whatever life this life is.
It's very possible. But it is time to close down the show because we got to get to the after show. So I will read my last super chow. We got one from Laptop 215, who gave us $5 and said, people who shame you for questioning them know what they are doing. People who seek to punish you for questioning them know what they are doing. People who don't want you to think or speak are not your friend. And that is probably the best summary of my objections to Hanlon's razor. So I think I'll leave it at that.
My summary is they probably don't because they're fucking idiots, but you shouldn't forgive them for that either. Because they're no worse. They're no better than the malicious. The incompetent are no better than the malicious. They're just as damaging. But I don't want to.
That can be true as well.
Yeah.
I was almost killed by an incompetent nurse when I was in labor. So there you go.
Jeez.
Yeah, she thought my 9-pounder was just a little baby. But he was a big guy. So, but he was born 2 weeks old already, so you know. But with that, we will see you next Thursday. Thanks to my two hosts for going over this. This material was a little different than what we usually do. Like, we didn't have a lot to look at. We had a lot to talk about. Thanks to everybody for listening and considering what we had to say. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. Good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.